Fontaine is pretty much doomed. At least that's what the prophecy will have you believe. Despite the doomsday outcome presented here, there are many different parties actually working to circumvent the grim outcome mentioned by the prophecy. But do any of these plans have an actual chance of avoiding the prophecy outright? And if not, can we think of a way to actually save Fontaine? That's what we'll be exploring in this video. Before we talk about that any further, if you want to see more Genshin Impact content, do consider subscribing to the channel. As usual, because we are talking about some of the lore here, I am going to spoil some things from the story in 4.1 if you haven't gone through it, so just keep that in mind. For those of you who don't remember, the prophecy essentially states that the people of Fontaine, excluding the current Hydro Archon, will eventually be washed away and dissipate into water as the sea levels rise. The prophecy was actually foretold by the very first Hydro Archon, and as we explore the Archon quest more, it seems to have a connection with the Primordial Sea that has been sealed away by the first Archon beneath the Fortress of Meripede. The Primordial Sea seems to have properties that can convert Fontaine natives into water, but why it does this is unknown. Now, we don't know much else about this prophecy or whether or not it will become reality, though many of its signs have recently started coming true. For example, the water levels are indeed rising, and despite Novelet keeping the Primordial Sea at bay for the moment, it has already leaked into the water surrounding Fontaine. So basically, anyone who has prolonged exposure to most of the water surrounding Fontaine will functionally start to dissolve and their sins washed away. While most Fontaine citizens don't worry too much about the prophecy, which gives me the impression that nobody really cares, there are a few groups in Fontaine who are working to circumvent this outcome. The Hydro Archon has long been suspected to be one of those people who largely ignores the prophecy, though recently this has been proven to be false. After some pressuring by Arlecchino, or the Knave, Furina blurted out in her frustration that she is indeed aware of the problem and is working on a plan to deal with the prophecy. Unfortunately, she doesn't go into what her plan exactly is. The only thing we do know is that she is collecting a large amount of indemnitium using the Oratrice. Now, she could very well be lying to cover her image here, but the traveler's reaction to her seriousness makes me believe otherwise. But that's as much as we know coming from Furina. She seems to have a plan, but we don't know what it is just yet. This lack of transparency does cause Arlecchino some frustration, however, and she, along with the House of Hearth, also seem to have a plan in place. Firstly, the House of Hearth are actively trying to get people to move away from coastal and low-lying areas, so that when and if the water level rises, they are not significantly affected. Aside from that, according to Linny, Arlecchino also seems to have a plan to deal with the prophecy overall. It's implied that she has made a deal with the Tsaritsa that after obtaining the Hydrognosis, she is given the approval to first use it, likely to circumvent the prophecy, before handing it over. We don't really know what she plans to do, and my guess is that she might assume something as powerful as the Gnosis can prevent the water level from rising by maybe controlling all waters in Fontaine. Whether or not it can actually do this is anyone's guess. We have seen that Novelet, who is the reincarnated Hydro Sovereign, did have the powers to control the Primordial Sea to some degree. And given that the Gnosis are said to be powers taken from the dragons, perhaps Arlecchino plans to use it to control the Primordial Sea itself. Though we aren't sure right now how much Arlecchino actually knows, especially regarding the details related to the Gnosis and dragons. Also, if this was really possible, I don't see why Furina wouldn't have already tried it. Overall, her plan seems to involve Fontaine's Hydrognosis, though what exactly she wants to do is not yet revealed. Aside from these two, the Fontaine Research Institute were also looking for a way to deal with the prophecy. In fact, the accident that put them out of commission, which relates to those flying cubes you see, are actually tied to their initial solution. It's not clear if they were doing this under the instruction of anyone in Fontaine, but essentially, their lead technician, Edwin Eastinghouse, had developed a field generator that could manipulate gravity. Basically, they wanted to lift Fontaine itself off the ground. Despite how crazy that sounds, it does seem to solve a lot of their problems, especially related to the rising sea levels and prophecy. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and caused a big enough accident that the research institute has mostly lost their credibility. The reason for their failure was said to be a lack of a sufficient energy source, as they were using the arc energy. I've speculated before that Furina's plan, which involves collecting indemnitium, could be related to this idea, but that's just speculation. Finally, the Duke of Meropide himself is also working on a plan. His plan is basically to rip off Moses and the 2012 movie by building an ark. Deep underneath the fortress of Meropide and taking inspiration from Fontaine's previous inhabitants, the Remurian people, Wriothesley is working on a big giant boat. If the water levels rose, he could just sail away. I don't know if the entirety of Fontaine could even fit into this ship of his, but perhaps he just wants to save as many people as possible. Now, those are just some of the ways the people in Fontaine themselves are trying to save it, and before ending this video, I'll throw in a few more ideas. One possible move they could do is just to build a wall. Yes, I know how dumb that sounds, but it's not like it hasn't been done before. Sumeru built a giant wall of stone to prevent sandstorms from hitting the rainforest, and perhaps Fontaine could do something similar. How they could accomplish this is beyond me, but still a possible option. Alternatively, I have also wondered whether Furina could just request aid from the other archons, especially if the traveler is involved, given they know most of the archons by this point. This sort of solution may be a bit of a cop-out though, as any issues in the future could very well be solved by the archons working together, basically a deus ex machina. The problem is that most of the archons have largely lost a majority of their strength, and perhaps wouldn't be in a position to help in the first place. Plus, Fontaine may not be interested in revealing its problems to the outside countries, on top of the fact that the other archons may just not be interested in helping. Another thing they could do is perhaps strengthen the seal on the Primordial Sea. It seems that the main instigator of the entire prophecy is the Primordial Sea itself. If the seal doesn't fail, then the water won't rise, and if it does, people won't be dissolved, so they could just always move. But again, this seems unlikely, as if there was a way to do it, I don't see why they haven't already. Plus, with the existing seal present, the water was already leaking out anyway. All in all, it seems that at the end of the day, the best solution is just to take advice from Patrick. They should take Fontaine and just move it somewhere else. If you have any better ideas on how to save Fontaine, I would love to hear them in the comments. If you enjoyed watching this video, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. As usual, have a nice day ahead.